Hello, it's Jen Taub. Welcome back to Booked Up, a podcast about you, me, and our favorite authors. We release a new episode every Sunday. Joining me today is Hadley Vlahos, author of the best-selling new book, The In-Between: Unforgettable Encounters During Life's Final Moments. Hadley is a hospice registered nurse, mother, and wife. Her husband, Chris, also works in the medical field as a doctor of physical therapy. Hadley started her career as a registered nurse at 22. As a hospice nurse, she now visits people at their homes while educating and sharing stories about hospice care on social media, where she has more than 1 million followers. I read, or actually listened to on Audible, The In-Between in one sitting. I literally could not stop listening. Hadley has a way of easing us into some of the most challenging, yet so enriching moments of human existence. The inevitable transition from life to wherever and whatever awaits us beyond. Organized around the stories of 12 of her hospice patients, whose names and personally identifiable details have been changed. With The In-Between, Hadley also shares her own journey, including painful memories growing up and self-doubts as an adult. Her vulnerability allows readers to face and tend to our own wounds and grow stronger. Okay, let's dive in. Hey, Hadley.
Hi.
How are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm pretty good. It's like 100 degrees right now, and I'm in the part of my house that's like 100 years old, and this part doesn't have the air, any kind of like air conditioning. And if I melt, just ignore it.
Got it.
How's your weather where you are?
It is raining cats and dogs today.
And where are you?
I'm right outside of New Orleans.
But that's not, when you wrote this book, weren't you living in Florida?
Yes, I was in the Destin, Florida area, and we moved to New Orleans a few years ago.
What brought you to that area?
Actually, Hurricane Michael wiped out my husband's hospital that he worked at. So we had to take a job over here, and we like it.
Oh, because you did write about that in the book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wow. Somehow I missed that hurricane. There are so many. But that one sounds like it was really, really awful for all of you.
Yeah, it was. It definitely was.
And am I remembering correctly that maybe your husband's brother, or he has some family in New Orleans?
Yes, my brother-in-law is in Baton Rouge.
Okay. And so are you missing anything back home at all?
No, not too much. We go visit sometimes.
Yeah. So I just want to say, just to start out with, how much I enjoy this book. And I'm just wondering, it is your first book, but you're quite a writer on social media. And I'm just curious what your process was like, writing your first book.
It was a lot more involved than I thought it was going to be. And I remember I wrote the first couple chapters really quickly, I had them in my head and I wrote them. We did the book proposal, and I remember my agent saying, "How long do you need to write the rest of the book?" And I said, "Maybe a few months." And he was like, "We're going to do 9." And I was like, 9? I did not need 9 months to write the book. I used every single day of that 9 months to write the book. It is very difficult. And the way I went about it, because it's chapters that follows my life cover to cover, but each chapter is a separate patient. At the beginning, I tried to just be like, okay, I finished chapter 1. Now I'm going to do chapter 2. And then I realized that I just needed to write whatever patient I felt called to that day. So I wrote them totally out of order.
You're making me feel better. This sounds familiar. I'm on my 3rd book, and it's not always going to happen in that linear way. I'm right now deep into, I don't know how many chapters it is, but I'm really deep into chapter 10 because something happened that inspired me. And I had told myself I was going to go back and fix up chapter 4, but you can't, the creative side of yourself wants to do what it wants to do, and you can't stop that, I think.
I totally agree. It's good to hear that I'm not alone in that.
And I wonder, which was the patient you were called? I know that the order it was in, but which was the patient you were called to write about first?
Carl. We
Aw.
were the closest for sure. And so he was also the one in my book proposal.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm forgetting the name of Carl's wife.
Oh, what did I name her? See, they're real people to me.
Oh, shoot.
Yes. So
Sorry.
I don't remember what I named her. But I have to be very careful with that so I don't say their real names.
Well, let me just ask, am I getting correct? Is that the wife who always had those cute little tracksuits?
Yes.
Okay, that I don't even need to know her name. I just wanted to make sure I had the right person. And let me ask you about that too, because when you write, in your case, when you're writing about lives and the closeness, first of all, of any kind of patient, there's going to be that confidentiality. But you also chose to use pseudonyms and to take out and change things that might be personally identifiable. And I already see that you are always going to be real careful about the names you use for people so you don't use their real names. But I wonder if some of those folks, though, the family members or maybe some of the colleagues you work with in nursing, do they recognize themselves and do they reach out to you positive or negative about it?
Some of them definitely do. They'll say, is that me? Like our marketer reached out to me and was like, am I the bubbly blonde marketer? And I was like, yeah, the other marketer is a guy. So yes, and you're blonde. So that's definitely you. And I think that there's really only one or two people in there that I don't put in the most positive light, which was my manager and then a nurse that I worked with. And I have not heard from either of them, but I worried about it a little bit.
I think it's really very brave of you to do that and important. I get from you, like I'm originally from the Midwest and which is different. It's not the same as the South, but there's this way that it's, I think, very difficult given maybe our similar upbringing, to be critical of anyone personally. And I think you're really fair, in this book, even the folks that, maybe you don't show in the most positive light. They were competent and capable people. But, you really, I think in the case, especially of this one hospital nurse, you share a completely different philosophy for how to interact with people and not even just patients near the end of their life, but at all times. And you can't write a book like this or talk about hospice or the medical profession without doing that. And just to say that, talk about things abstractly doesn't work. The readers need to see what you're talking about and how that felt. And, some of the way that people behaved really stung. And let me just talk about the guy who was the manager at your hospice, the thing that felt like a punch in the gut. Can you talk a little bit about when you were, when you had brought into hospice, his name is, Mr. Al. Mm-hmm. And I love how in the South you call everyone Mr. or Ms. with their first name. But Mr. Al was homeless. Can you talk a little bit about that experience and that kind of clash with your manager?
That was very different for me to take care of a homeless patient because we always say that we go to people's homes as hospice nurses, but I hadn't really ever understood that could mean that under a bridge, like in Mr. Al's case. And he did not have food at one point and was having reactions to the medications causing nausea because he did not have food. And so, of course, my easy solution, anyone would think, I'm going to bring him food. This is a hospice patient. And so I was talking to my manager, just saying, oh, yeah, things are going great. I'm going to go get him some food. And he told me, you cannot do that. You cannot show favoritism to any patient. And I said, what? Are you kidding me? Like, come on, we are getting someone food. And he said, well, I don't want to have to fire you. We can't do this. And it has been such a push and pull for me my entire career between I don't want to get in trouble, but also I have to do what's right by patients. And I think that so many nurses in healthcare feel that push and pull daily. And
it was so sweet. If I remember correctly, it was your husband who took some of your son's snacks and put them in the car for you, and then you figured out a whole way to be able to be there. And you got him the food that he needed, and I guess he even had some bottled water too that another one of your colleagues had brought him.
Yes, absolutely. And yeah, we did. We figured out a way around it. And, that was very early on in my nursing journey. Today, I have enough experience that I would just roll my eyes if anyone ever said that to me and go, okay, sure. I'm going to do it anyway, though.
And that's what's unique, I think, too, about both you as a writer and your experience. As you note in your book, the in between, that you were pretty young at the time that you went into nursing and that you became a hospice nurse. And you also mentioned, you had this expression that someone I knew just used recently, that sometimes nurses eat their young, yes. meaning that the hierarchies in the profession, and this can be true of any profession, that some folks maybe who are more senior in their jobs aren't always as nice to younger people. And so you're trying to deal with that culture on top of it at all times. The other nurse, the thing that's really heartbreaking about that is that, not the other nurse, the nurse that you mentioned, not in the most favorable light, that she had been at one time a mentor to you, and you had you had looked at her sort of no nonsense behavior and how she sort of helped you through a different light when you moved into hospice care, and then especially when you landed due to a number of circumstances, the hurricane Michael that you mentioned, that you end up at that hospital in the emergency department with your beloved mother-in-law. Is it okay to talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So can you remind me of what you had gone maybe to the nurse's station, you overheard her saying something that was a little brusque? Yeah,
she was put to, my mother-in-law was put into the ER because she had just a little illness. And they said, in order to continue chemotherapy, you need to get this illness taken care of, go to the ER. And so she was already there when I got off work. So I was walking in to go see her. And that was the ER that I trained at and trained under. And so when I walked in, there were a group of nurses with her talking, Tracys, what I call her in the book, and saying, what do they want us to do? Like, she has cancer. We're not going to cure her. What do they expect us to do? And I overheard that, and I knew that is who she was talking about, just based on proximity to the room and knowing the layout. And, she came into the room. She was very short with all of us, very no BS, like you said, and she said, okay, I'm going to give you this medication. And my mother-in-law was like, what is this medication you're giving me? She's like, well, if you don't want it, you don't have to take it up with the doctor. And I learned to be like that with her, and her ability to control certain situations and like really take charge, I thought was the way that you're supposed to be as a nurse, because everyone really respected her.
And that's interesting too, right? That's what the signals when you're young in a profession, you learn from the people around you, and you want to be treated with dignity and treated with respect. And I think it's so interesting what the world, how different hospice is, that the focus is on comfort and care and being present with somebody through this really important transition in life. And I wish we could infuse traditional medicine with more emphasis on care and the whole person. And I imagine that if you are wealthy enough and you have your own private physician, you can get that kind of attention. But in some cases, it's hard enough to even find a doctor, and doctors and nurse practitioners are very busy and just moving on to the next patient. But do you think there's something that you've learned from hospice that could be incorporated into regular treatment of patients?
Absolutely. What my actual role in hospice as a nurse is called a case manager, and the full-time nurses are case managers. And I wish that we had more of that in other types of medicine, which is that we have all these other roles. So we have aides, we have chaplains, we have social workers, we have the doctor. But at the end of the day, I am responsible for that patient. and making sure that everything is going okay. And I wish that we had more of that, because it feels like a lot of disjointed pieces a lot of times. You go to this doctor and maybe they'll send the records to your other doctor, and then you go to the ER, and then you go here and go there, and you're just putting out fires, in my opinion, and we're not actually having a plan in place.
I think it's so important because I remember when my beloved paternal grandmother, Lillian, was dying. She had cancer, and she was in her, I think she was in her early 90s. And it was like insane what happened. My father was a family doctor, but I used to sometimes make rounds with him at the hospital. He'd go visit his patients. And there was a time when he, as the family doctor for somebody, would know everything that was going on with his patient. Now we went in there and it was like, there was nobody who could tell me, even tell my father at the time, what was going on with his mother. Supposedly there's someone called a hospitalist, but like they won't be here until whatever time. And I was like, how is this even... and when I was listening to your book and you're talking about the meetings that people would have daily, so the handoffs between case managers, everyone kind of knew what was going on. I mean, that should happen. I'm just baffled how end of care works in the hospital and just how regular care. I have a family member who, due to cancer, was given immunotherapy that gave him instant, what is it called, type 1 diabetes, which is pretty common if, I guess, the immunotherapy is working. I guess that's good about the cancer, but bad to suddenly have diabetes. And then on top of it, what was the other thing, like for the diet? And then also the kidney issues, because he'd had kidney cancer, had one removed. And so he's being told by one nutritionist, don't eat this because of your kidneys. And the other thing, because of diabetes, don't eat that. And it's like they totally conflict. And there's no, and I get that there might not be an actual answer, but there should be a point person who can deal with all of this. And, and you're nodding your head,
I totally agree. And we have some of those that come onto hospice with those types of things, like 2 diet orders, that one person says you can only have liquids and the other one says you can have soft foods, and they're from 2 different specialists. So as in between, I call both doctors and say, you're saying this, you're saying that. Can you tell me why? And then I go to our doctor and say, this is both of their why. What should I do? And they tell me what to do.
So I just noticed that you said as they're in between. So now I have witnessed a third way. I've noticed now, 3 different times you have used the expression, the in between, which is a wonderful title. It seems like the most prevalent usage is to describe what you witness as a hospice nurse, like that place where a person's transitioning between life and somewhere, somewhere beyond. And that also you use the in-between at one time to talk about where the trouble with healthcare delivery in America, where some people, if you don't have enough money, then maybe you can't put your family, like someone who has dementia or Alzheimer's, into a nursing care facility. You might not have enough for that, for the private facility, but you might make too much money to get them into, the government facility. And then this third way you've used in between as sort of a go-between between all the different medical providers. Is that what you intended with this title, or is there even a fourth way that you use it?
I think that covers all of them. But yes, the title always has meant to have multiple meanings. And even my own personal journey of finding the in-between between my very strict beliefs growing up and then going the total opposite way after that, and now being very comfortable in this in-between phase of being like, you know what, I don't have to have all the answers, but this is what I do know and this is what I do see, and it brings me happiness.
I want to talk a bit about your religious upbringing and then also the spirituality and journey that you're talking about. But I want to share with you something I don't think I've talked to many people about. But I was raised Jewish, and I still am. And I've always been interested in the afterlife, or at least not just interested in what happens next, if anything, but I was also I was curious because in the Jewish religion, I wasn't sure what the teaching was. That in Judaism, we don't actually believe in in hell, but I assumed that we believed in the afterlife. But I was curious because it wasn't something that came up that much in my teaching. And so I remember a couple, many summers ago, because now I remember it must have been before COVID. So I'm guessing maybe 10 years ago, I was at an event outside the synagogue, and it turns out my rabbi was out there, as was another rabbi. So I had a whole bunch of them standing together by the playground. And I asked them each, I said to Justin, David, my rabbi, I said, well, what happens? We have this religion, and doesn't it seem like it's really important if you have a religion to have like an answer to what happens after life? Like, I really want to know. And he said, well, Jewish people don't agree. It's like some people think this, some people think that. And I was like, are you kidding me? Because the stereotype is that we argue about everything. And I'm like, you're kidding me? It's like none of the rabbis agree. There's no teaching.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh,
and maybe I'm sure I'm going to get some listener who tells me that I heard that wrong, because I always wonder, like, if you pass away, in, let's say me, 56, if this happened to me, am I going to age? What's the theory? Am I always going to be 56? Someone I lost, a dear friend, almost 10 years ago, would she all this stuff, like all the questions you have that seem so juvenile to ask, because I actually myself believe it's a little more spiritual than that, and but anyway, I don't have any good answers, but I was a little frustrated. So now I want to ask you about your, sort of your religious upbringing, and how the terrible thing that happened to your close friend, the football playing friend, kind of, I think, in a way, took you off track, but actually put you in the place you were meant to be. And do you want to share more on that?
Yeah, I was raised very strict Episcopalian, went to church all the time, and just really believed everything I was told. Just like how you believe your parents tell you should brush your teeth every day, and you say, okay, I should brush my teeth every day. You don't really question it. That's how I was with religion. This is what happens. Okay. And then whenever my friend Taylor Haugen, we were 15 and we were at a football game, he was a football player, and he was hit. It's a 1 in a million kind of thing. He was hit on both sides by 2 players, and it immediately ruptured his liver. And he was actually able to run off the field. And so at first, we didn't really know that anything was seriously wrong. Of course, the ambulance came and got him from the sidelines, but from the stands, you don't think that he's died. And so they tried to do emergency surgery, didn't work. And so then when I found out that my friend had died, I started asking questions in church, very similar to what you did, and said, why would this happen? I do not understand why. And I just didn't feel like I got the answers that I was looking for, being said that he's in a better place. And I see his parents who are that was their only child and have just never been the same. And knowing him and knowing all these goals he had in life that he was going to accomplish, and say, I don't know about that. And this is not a sufficient answer for me. And so that was really difficult for me. And then when I was interning in the ER and really saw what I considered to be the true horrors of the world, just the absolute worst things that can happen to a human being, you see, and talking to all these ER nurses who did not believe in anything, understandably, I was like, okay, well, maybe there really isn't anything. And then by working in hospice care, I've come to this point where I say, you know what? I don't really know if anyone has all of the answers, but these are my experiences. And I feel like there is a spiritual afterlife. And what a lot of people don't understand whenever I say that is I'm not saying spirituality is a religion. I think that religions can be spiritual. And if you say, this is how I want to live my life by these rules that I think will help me when I'm in the afterlife and help me be a better person here, I think that's wonderful. And being a spiritual person doesn't mean that you dislike religions.
Can we talk about, speaking of spirituality, talk about Carl? I just saw your face light up when you mentioned him. He was one of your first, I think, based on the book, patients and hospice, and also, as you just mentioned, part of the book proposal. So, someone very special to you. Can you talk about that experience? And and some of them may be the unique things about your relationship with him, but also some of the things that you started to see that were in common that happened when people were maybe beginning their transitions.
Yeah, Carl was one of my first patients, but I had him for a very long time, longer than most hospice patients, was they're supposed to be 6 months or less, but it's not an exact science. So I had him longer than 6 months, and he was not able to get out of bed. So all he did all day as an 80-something-year-old man was watch the news, watch sports, and just really lay there. He did not like us at first at all. He wanted to be left alone, but his wife, who was a nurse, insisted. And I started to get him to talk to me by sharing that I was a single mom, and I was getting him to teach me things, teach me about sports, tell me what's going on in the news, and taking more of a role that was not so much as do this, do that, authoritarian type role. And he started writing these notes to me because he said he would forget what he wanted to tell me. And so every time I showed up, I got a note with the latest news so that I could stay up to date. And this just is something that evolved between us. And he became like a grandfather to me. And one day, very randomly, I got a call that they needed me. And when I showed up, he was out of bed, which I was already extremely shocked by because I had never seen him out of bed. And of course, my mind goes to, I have been charting that this person is bedbound for 8 months. Like, what?
So that blows my mind. That's like he was bedbound and you see him walking around. Well, actually, first you saw the bed was empty and you were freaked out, right?
Yes.
You thought the worst.
Think that was fine.
Right.
I thought the funeral home had come and gotten him and no one told me.
Oh,
Yes, that was scary. And so he's walking around, which we call the surge of energy. And I've seen it so many times since then. And he was playing hide and seek with his deceased daughter, who had died so many years before. And I didn't even know that they had a daughter. Even though I was so close to them, I think it was so painful that they just did not talk about it.
And she had been a small child, right? When she
she was a toddler and she drowned. And so whenever he says that he's playing hide and seek and he's like getting down on his knees like a 20-year-old looking in small places, I'm like, what is going on? So
how old did you say he was? I forgot.
He was in his 80s.
Oh my goodness.
Yes. And so I asked his wife, like, who is this person, Anna, that he says he's playing hide and seek with? I didn't know. I knew their family, and I knew that I did not know any Anna. And she was shocked, of course, and she was like, that's our baby girl. Like, she drowned, and he has blamed himself, even though he could not have done anything. He wasn't even there. But, the protective daddy, I should have been there, I should have saved her type thing. And he said, he was playing hide and seek with her, and she had come to get him before he died. And so that happened. And then the next day, I could tell that he was getting much closer to death. And he told me...
He was back in bed at that point.
He was back in bed, yes. And one of the last things he told me was, thank you for giving me something to look forward to instead of death. And I had never really put the pieces together what those notes were doing and that it was giving him a purpose in life. And it was a very special relationship. And I think about him often. And when I'm feeling burnt out, I always remember that and am reminded to show up as that young, eager nurse who wants to make connections with her patients.
I love that you're just watching and the way you tell the story about, the way you just kind of sat on his bed while you waited till, I guess, a commercial break. Just something as simple as that. He's watching his sports. You wait respectfully because you had to do your when you come to see your hospice patients, you do your physical assessment. Mm-hmm. And I love the method that you say you have and that you maybe were taught, which you start with the top of their head and go down to the toes so that you don't ever skip something. You don't have something some other order. But you waited. You showed him some respect, and he probably felt some autonomy, and then you started asking him, and didn't you kind of pretend like you knew nothing about sports at first, but then he kind of did teach you things you didn't fully know about the news and things.
Yeah, absolutely. He was always keeping me up to date. I would have conversations with people and I'd be like, yeah, I know all about this because he would tell me.
I was really particularly interested in, you mentioned this visitation that he felt that he had from his toddler, from Anna. This was not the only instance of that type of thing that you experienced. I think the one that struck me the most was involved Edith, and her husband John. Those are, I guess, the pseudonyms.
Yeah.
And I just have to say before I ask about what she saw, this is the woman who had Alzheimer's and was also sort of declining. I mean, these couples who stick with their spouses and care for them even when it is so difficult. I just admire so many of them. And, it kind of gave me the chills, the story about Edith.
Yeah. Yeah. You want me to share it?
Yeah, I do.
It still blows my mind to this day, even though it happened so long ago. But Edith, as you said, had Alzheimer's, and her husband, John, took care of her so well. He was so committed to caring for her, and he was having a lot of difficulty in the last few months of her life because she was still able to walk, but mentally she was not able to be reasoned with anymore. So she would get out in the middle of the night. At one point, they had to get the cops involved because she had walked away and they couldn't find her. Just very scary stuff. And we kept saying, we need to put her in a locked unit in a nursing home. And he said, this is my job. I don't want to put her in a nursing home. And so he kept saying, like, I'll think about it, putting it off. And then one night I was on call and he called me because she was having a breakdown, which in my mind at the time is just another thing we were dealing with her, another complication of being at home, him trying to do this caregiving thing, which he's equally as old as her, which a lot of people don't think about that with caregivers. Like, they're the same age a lot of times.
Such a good point. Yep.
And they have their own issues going on medically. So I get there and she thinks that her and his bed is on fire, which this is not something that's super uncommon that will happen with patients, that like hallucinations or agitation. So I call our doctor. He gives me orders to give her basically anti-anxiety medications. Not working. I'm starting to freak out because 15 minutes doesn't seem like that long. But whenever you have someone screaming that something is on fire, while you're waiting for medication to kick in, 15 minutes feels like a lifetime.
Yeah, I think a minute would be a lot for me.
It is. So I tried again, got orders to give more. And finally, it's the middle of the night. I felt so bad. Finally, I call a very experienced hospice nurse and say, this is what is happening. This medication is not working. I know I'm about to call him back. He's just going to tell me to get more. Usually medication will help a little bit and then you get more and it'll help a little bit more. It was not touching it. And I was like, I can't keep doing this. What do I do? And she said, okay, what's going on? Her bed's on fire. And I was like, yeah. She's like, move her bed away from the fire. Like, it's obvious. And I was like, I don't think that's going to work. And
because you didn't see any fire because there was no fire.
Yeah, her bed's on fire. She's like, I think it'll work. Call me back if it doesn't, but good night. And so I did. I moved it to a different bedroom that they had that was empty. And as soon as I moved it, she got in bed and went to sleep. And I was like, oh, my goodness, I cannot believe that worked. And that was pretty much the extent to it, other than her husband saying, it's time. We need to go to a nursing home. I can't do this anymore. That was too much for me. And it was a lot. And so she did get into a facility. And she gradually declined from there, and she had a great experience in the facility, and he still visited her every single day. And then after she died, months after she died, I was at the facility seeing different patients, and he was having a ceremony. He had dedicated a bench in her honor and was scattering her ashes. So I went to it, and he comes and approaches me and is like, hey, like, you're not going to believe me. I'm still don't know why this happened, but after Edith died, there was a fire in that room. And the only reason I am okay is because I never move the bed back that you moved. And he was like, she knew. I know that she knew. But there's no logical explanation to that. And that's one of the things where I say, like, some things you're like, okay, maybe it's a coincidence. But that, you're like, that is quite an odd coincidence.
It really is. And I'm so glad that you called that nurse in the middle of the night and that she answered your phone. Too, I mean, I think the other piece besides those sort of moments that give you the chills is this sort of solidarity or sisterhood or what have you among people in this profession. I mean, it's not the only time that you've got to be up in the middle of the night. And I wonder about the burnout factor, for this type of nursing.
It's definitely difficult. They say that vast majority of hospice nurses are never hospice nurses beyond 5 years. And it's very emotionally difficult work, and it is a 24/7 job. And the biggest piece of advice I have for people going through that is to really learn to lean on your team. And you cannot be everything for everyone, and you cannot pour from an empty cup, basically.
What is that? And you mentioned team. What is it like? Could you kind of describe the typical day-to-day, like, from, morning till when you're no longer, I guess, on call? I guess you're the on-call, or what does that team look like, and so on?
Yeah, so it's pretty independent, the day-to-day, which I do really like. I like being kind of on my own, but we usually have a morning meeting. So every single person gets on the morning meeting, nurses, aides, the chaplain, the social worker, our manager, and we say what had happened the night before, since the majority of us do not work the night shift. So the on-call nurse will say, these are all the calls I got. And then we'll all talk about, say, well, with Edith, it was that she had gotten out of the house and they had to get the police involved. So my manager said, you need to go with the social worker. Social worker's also on the call. Y'all need to go this morning. Do not see another patient first. Go figure out something. This cannot be happening. That's not okay. So you all get together and you have that call and you figure things out. And then I will see patients, usually about 5 patients, and you just go to their home, spend about 45 minutes to an hour with them, travel to the next patient's home. And at the end of the day, we also have a phone call where we share what happened so that the on-call nurse knows what to prepare for as she goes into the night. And then every other week, we all get together, usually over a lunch on Fridays, and we will go through every single patient with the doctor and anything that's not urgent, such as a refill that's coming up, or, does this patient still need to be on hospice? Those kind of things we address then.
And how do people, it might vary, but just generally speaking, how do people find out about the availability of home hospice care and get admitted into it and pay for it? Is it like part of regular insurance and things like that?
Yeah, usually it will come from your doctor. Your doctor will normally say it might be time for hospice care, and they'll send over the referral. And unfortunately, that can mean that your experience can vary a lot, because we have certain doctors that will not send patients over until they are, a day or two left. And then it's very hard for us to really do anything other than try to get things under control at the very end. And so a big part of what I do on social media with this book is trying to educate people. This is what it looks like. You should bring it up to your doctor. You can say, hey, I know it's an uncomfortable conversation, but whenever I'm eligible for hospice, just give me a heads up if you think that I might be eligible. So even if you're not sure, the nurses can come by and we can do an assessment and see if you're eligible or not. Anyone can call their local hospice and ask to be assessed for it. And then insurance pays for hospice 100%. If you're over 65 and you have Medicare, you won't have to worry about anything with hospice. And then under 65 with private insurance, every company I've ever worked for, if there's a copay, we will pay it.
And so this is interesting because I think that a lot of this has evolved and developed over time. Because I know some places just have they used to only have a facility, like a hospice facility. And now it's just really nice that people can be in their own home, experiencing the end of life instead of doing this sort of being hooked up to a bunch of machines.
I agree.
But then again, it's tricky though. I mean, you look at someone like former President Jimmy Carter, and that sweetheart has been in hospice. What is it now? 6 months?
7 months. I think he's over.
Yeah, which is just a good man, generally speaking. But also, you don't really know. But I suppose, I guess there are different ideas that people have and they should make their own choices in life. But I think quality of life matters. And so what are the, one of the moments I think that you describe a few different times that can be hard for the caregiver, who could be the spouse or a parent or a adult child of somebody, making the decision when they go into hospice that the do not resuscitate, which is a different kind of thing than you and I right now. I would never want a do not resuscitate order. What if I'm in a car accident or whatever? I'm a young person. But when you're in hospice, when you are in the late stages, let's say of cancer or something like that, what does it mean to say that to say do not resuscitate versus resuscitate? What does that mean?
So what I always tell people, because it does seem like this big thing, am I signing my death wish? And a lot of people seem to think that it means that we're not going to do anything for you at all. But in reality, you can get any and all treatment up until your heart stops. So what I always tell people is, if you don't sign this, if you want to be what's called a full code, that means that you have died and I'm trying to bring you back to life. Your body has died. And when a lot of people hear that, they're like, oh, wait, no. And I think a lot of people think it means prevent me from dying. But that's not what it means. It means try to bring you back to life.
Yeah. And, I certainly wouldn't want to be hooked up to some kind of machine in a hospital indefinitely until someone has to make. I think it's a harder decision for a family member to make if somehow you've been resuscitated and you've experienced brain death, and then at some point, how many years later, you're putting them in a position to have to unplug you. First of all, even saying those words is awful, but it's also, again, this thing about dignity and quality of life, and also, caring about the people around you in the position you might be putting them in too. But it's so much to think about. I mean, I think in reading the in-between, there are just a lot of different things that hadn't crossed my mind that I think I might want to plan for, including, and I'm sure you get asked this question a lot, but are you busy 50 years from now? Because I would like to book you as my hospice nurse.
Right.
You're laughing. No, I don't know. Seriously, no. Let's just take out the calendars and we can. No, I'm kidding. So what I found interesting too in part of your past is one of the things that maybe makes you especially more comfortable with this topic is your mother's background. Did I read correctly that her parents had a funeral home?
Yes, they still work as funeral directors. And if you've ever seen the movie My Girl,
I have.
Which is where it's the parlor where they hold the funerals, and then the basement is where they embalm, and then they live on the top part. That's how my mom grew up.
And she had no issues with that, like nightmares or anything, or
no?
That's how she.
Not at all. And I was raised very death positive. My grandparents are crazy, and they still are. We do this Christmas game called the number game, which is basically like Dirty Santa, where everyone will put in stuff. My grandmother put in an urn last year, and I was like, why do you have an urn? She was like, they're expensive. I think it's So in case anyone needs an urn, and it's so funny is we got stuck with it, and our dog actually died. We actually used it. So I was like, okay.
What kind of dog? I love dogs.
A West Highland Terrier. Oh, she's in the book. Holly.
Oh, right.
Yes.
Oh, my goodness. I love dogs. So, you know, the thing is, it's so interesting when you write a book where you're exposing other people, I guess, for loss of a better word, the parts of, their lives and their challenges and their end of life. I think it was really generous of you to also put some of yourself in the book. And I was surprised because some of the pieces of that resonated and felt just like a gut punch. And I think I wonder about if I can ask about, the stuff, the verbal abuse, I guess, is the best thing that I can call it that your father subjected your mother to. Mm-hmm. Can I ask a bit about that? Is that okay?
Sure, yeah.
It seems like it's more common and people don't talk about it that much because obviously if someone lays a hand on somebody, we know domestic abuse is wrong. But I think verbal abuse is equally bad, the kinds of messages that people send. And one thing that you heard your father in front of you criticize your mother's weight. Mm-hmm. And you didn't see your mother's face when the scene you described, and maybe it happened more than once, but in the scene you described, her back was to you. But you knew it must have been devastating. Yeah. And the message you got, that so many of us young women got or get was, I don't want to be criticized. I don't want to gain weight. I don't want to, and you talked a bit about struggling with an eating disorder. And I wonder, and then that relationship ended. But I thought it was interesting to talk about why, and I do see the connection here, but that came up in the context of as you are struggling, not overtly struggling with it, but living with something as part of that could flare up. It was a gift given to you essentially by one of your hospice patients, because there's something about the wisdom that someone wants to impart on others toward the end of life. And where she's, she was someone very young in her 40s who passed on, who looked at you and could really see you, right? And I guess she had been someone who worked out a lot, and she asked if you did. And so she gave you this bit of advice to always don't pass up the piece of cake, which obviously is a metaphor for more than that. But it's something you mentioned, like you said someone who follows you on social media got that tattoo.
Yeah, I think I've seen like 7 tattoos now. It's so many.
What exactly is it?
Too. They have a couple of people have it in script, and then a couple of people have like a piece of cake with like. And
what does it say? Eat the cake, or what are the? And it was the first piece of that day when she told us you had some cheesecake. I love cheesecake.
Oh, yeah, it's so good. But what really stood out to me with that really cemented it in my mind was that she was so wonderful, so amazing. And of course, she didn't have a significant other, which is fine, but she came off as such an amazing friend to me, just me being the hospice nurse. And she really knew that she had not prioritized anything except her own obsession with how she appeared to others, that she didn't have any friend. I never saw a single friend come visit her at her bedside as she was dying, and she died alone. And that really, to me, shows that whenever you're prioritizing the wrong things, it really can have very serious consequences.
I found that so sad because it was Christmas morning, wasn't it, when she passed on, and you told her sister to come, and she didn't want to be away from her own kids on the holiday. Meanwhile, it goes without saying that you were.
Yeah.
And there's something in here to think about, which is, you're so subtle in your writing, and you're so non-judgmental. I mean, although those couple people you mentioned, the judgment's there, but, it's hard for family members to take care of another member of their family. But what does it say about our society that, you have to bring a stranger in to do that. And I understand people need breaks, but I felt that really stung that there was a family nearby who wasn't by her bedside when she passed.
It was really difficult. And something else that was very subtle in the book is that was actually the only family member that spoke to her. And so I always have wondered, was that the best that she could do? And who really was she? Even though I saw her as this amazing, wonderful person,
right.
Incredible, we only get one side of our patients. And people can have regrets on their deathbed and maybe change a little bit. And I have always tried to not fault her sister for that, because they did do a lot. And maybe she did all that she could do.
You know, I think you make an excellent point. It's kind of like meeting a new friend or meeting someone on vacation. You know, maintaining relationships and friendships, and you know, it's a marathon, and maybe that was hard for her. You know, I want to go back to Mr. Al, the guy who was homeless. The courage it took for you. You went out in the middle of the night sometimes to this underpass, right?
Yeah.
To a homeless encampment on your own to check on your patient. And what I was trying to picture, because you mentioned, because some of the things that you give, so some of the sort of palliative care is to administer morphine to people. Mm-hmm. And it was a lockbox on site, or was it in your car that you had?
No, I don't know who brought that out. We have them in the office. Different people will bring, whoever's by the office will bring it by when need be.
Because none of it disappeared, even though you're dealing with people that you would think might have substance abuse problems. It was, so I thought that was interesting.
And they did have like a little family and community, but I also think that Gil, the friend, as I call him, really monitored and made sure that nothing bad was going to happen.
And what did you ever find out while you were there, what brought Gil, the friend, or Mr. Al to that position? I remember a little bit, but I'm forgetting how he ended up homeless.
He was I don't even remember if I put this in the book, but he was a construction worker.
Right.
And basically, whenever he was not able to work anymore due to his illness, he didn't have anything to fall back on. He didn't have retirement. He doesn't get insurance. He doesn't get, because he didn't come here legally.
Oh, right. That's what you were suspecting. And so there was nothing, and he was just.
So he was living paycheck to paycheck. And then when those paychecks stopped, a lot of other people do have options in our country, but he did not.
Right. Well, before we wrap things up, I just want to thank you for your work and for sharing what your knowledge and these stories through social media and through this book, so people know more about their options. It's a real gift and a kindness. And I wonder how you are now that you have 3 children, how you are finding the balance. It's always hard between work and family. How much hospice work are you doing, and what's next for you?
Yeah, I work PRN now, which is much better. So each week I just go to my manager and say, this is what I can do. It's averaging out to about 1 day a week and then 1 on-call night per week. And then other times she'll say someone has a scheduled vacation. Can you work this full week? So it varies, but that has made it much easier with the book and the kids and all of that kind of stuff. And as far as moving forward, I am hoping to write another book and give more stories.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that. And at the very beginning, you said I work, did you say part-time?
PRN. Yeah, I forget not everyone knows. It means
what was that?
As needed is what that means.
PRN means as needed?
Yeah.
How do you figure that? What do the letters mean?
I have no idea what they are.
Okay. Yeah, it was funny. I'm so glad I didn't, because I was like, do I just let that slide, or do I? So PRN. No, I'm
glad you had me clarify, but it's
I know. Maybe it's part-time registered nurse.
Maybe so. I'm not sure. Well, we use it in medicine too to talk about giving out It's probably Latin, but it is a great option for nurses, and I'm so grateful. Nursing has so many wonderful options, but it's mutually beneficial. So if they don't need me, if they don't have any need, they don't have to schedule me, but also it can work around my schedule, which is wonderful.
I like that. That's the kind of balance I think that people need. So before we wrap up, finally, is there anything I didn't ask you that you wanted to talk about?
Not that I can think of.
Okay. And how do people find you besides obviously finding the In-Between anywhere books are sold? How else can they hear more from you?
I'm on social media. Everywhere is Nurse Hadley, and nursehadley.com has all of the projects I'm currently working on.
And that's Nurse, N-U-R-S-E, Hadley, Hadley, right?
Yes, thank you.
I'm so excited to read your next book, but no rushing. And please don't tell anyone you can do it in 3 months again.
No, never.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
It's not every day that we take a moment to think about the end of our lives as opposed to what's happening in the next 5 minutes, or what are we making for dinner, or how am I going to pay that bill, or some kind of petty grievance that we might have, or some event we're looking forward to. It's not every day that we, again, take that moment to think about, how it's going to end. And if we do, we try to kind of usually avoid thinking about it because it's sad, it's scary, it's the unknown. But I think it's much more mature and healthy to take that time and think about end-of-life care, not just because all of us eventually face our own mortality, but also because we have family members who could greatly benefit from knowing about the options and how much dignity and how much care and how the end of life can be pain-free and meaningful. And I felt like this book really opened my eyes to those possibilities. And there couldn't be a better spokesperson for this than Hadley Vlahos, who is just charming and caring and thoughtful. I forgot to ask her one thing that I wanted to ask about, which was when she got married, her mother-in-law, who she mentioned, she got married at the time that her mother-in-law was very ill with brain cancer. And her fiance was choosing some of the songs for the wedding, and it's traditional at weddings to have a dance toward the beginning of when dancing begins after the ceremony and the celebration, to have a dance for the mother and the son. And so the music that Chris chose for that dance was a Green Day song called Good Riddance. And Hadley was a little bit skeptical at first, not just because of the title of the song, but also because it's kind of like an upbeat song. You might know it better by the refrain, I hope you had the time of your life. But it turns out that it was really wonderful. She enjoyed dancing to it. Everyone had a wonderful time at the wedding. And that song still means so much to them. With this book, The In-Between, why I encourage you to look at this book, to read it or listen to it on Audible or share it with somebody, is because, not just because it's comforting, but because you really see the humanity in this particular occupation. I think if I would go back, I think being a hospice nurse is something that I would have found real meaning in. You are making a big difference in people's lives in a really challenging moment, not just the person who is dying, but also their family who is scared and sad. And in our society, not really often well-trained or experienced in what to expect and how to handle everything. And I think it's a really nice work. And I would encourage people who are in nursing or in the medical field to think about it. But mostly I encourage you to pick up this book, The In-Between, and give it a read. And thank you all again for spending this time with us on Booked Up. We really appreciate that you follow us and that you tell your friends about the show. I will be back next week with another episode as we continue to explore the writing process and the nonfiction world together. Please let us know what you think I always love getting email at bookedup@politicon.com and also mail at bookedup at P.O. Box 147, Northampton, Massachusetts 01061.